I've always been a big fan of Lufia 2. It's one of my favorite childhood games and combines the concept of turn-based RPGs with a lot of puzzle elements mixed into all dungeons, making it a very fun experience to play through. In my personal opinion, it is one of the most underrated games on the SNES, though to be fair, it shared a platform with some of the most popular JRPGs of all time, like Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, and many others. I did want to play Lufia 2 for a while, since it's been a few years since my last playthrough, but I needed some kind of motivation or goal, if you will. After playing through it a few times over the years, the game is not necessarily the hardest anymore, so I wanted some kind of incentive, some kind of challenge, to make it harder on me. So I thought, what if Maxim doesn't want to rely on friendship and love in order to defeat the Sinistrals, but is an egotistical maniac who wants to save the world and be famous all by himself? Well, this is it. Today, we're going to find out if you can beat Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals using only Maxim. So, the rules for this are rather simple. Only Maxim is allowed to do anything. Party members alive must be killed off immediately, so basically, no meat shielding allowed. No capsule monsters are used, since this is a Maxim only run, and also no ancient cave, since potential blue chests can make you overpowered fairly easy. And last but not least, no RNG manipulation. If anybody has ever watched a speedrun of this game, you probably already know what this means. For everybody else, here is a quick breakdown. RNG, also called the random number generator, is responsible for all kinds of randomness in a game. In Lufia 2, RNG is 100% movement based. That means essentially by moving or attacking the same way every single time, the outcome will always be the same. This is used in a speedrun setting to manipulate item drops, as well as manipulating favorable boss patterns. Obviously, I'm not going to do that here, since it ruins the actual challenge of the playthrough. I do want to point out though that I'm doing this on retry mode. Retry mode doesn't change anything on the actual difficulty of the game, but it does give you 4 times the experience at gold, essentially cutting down the time on the actual grinding you have to do. So it's actually far more for convenience than anything else. Now, for everybody that has played Lufia 2, and I assume most of you watching this video have, because why else would you be here, you would probably think, wait a minute, how are you going to do the clown fights in the Treasure Sword Shrine? Well, you are kinda right. Practically, you cannot do this without ROM hacks or anything else, since the game forces Guy and Talon on you for this one single fight, and I'm actually doing this on a real SNES. So, for the sake of the challenge and the video, we're going to ignore the rules of the challenge for this one fight, since the game doesn't allow it any otherwise, but we'll get into more details later. With that being said, let's dive right into action. The game starts with Maxim, or Solo as he's called in this run, who returns from monster hunting and visits his childhood friend Tia, who tells him that he's not getting the same amounts of money from monster hunting anymore. They have a brief conversation, Maxim gets slapped because he doesn't get Tia's hints, and he leaves the shop again. As he is about to leave town, he gets stopped by the Elder, who wants to show him how monster fighting is done, which totally makes sense because it's not like Maxim hasn't been sword fighting his entire life, but whatever. So we head into the training cave south of town. We play around with monsters a little bit, shoot arrows and push pillars to get the reset spell for hard-earned work and return back to the town, where Tia already cooks a semi-delicious dinner meal and tries to make more moves on Maxim. Maxim, being the playboy he is, thanks Tia for the meal and leaves again, before finding out that a monster has stolen the key to Sundeltan. So our hero decides to go back to Tia, buy a few more boomerangs, and makes his way towards getting the key back. Now, there isn't really much worth mentioning here, since at this point of the game you only have Maxim in your party regardless, so he solves a few puzzles for a couple of items and approaches the first boss before quickly disposing him with boomerangs. After the fight, Maxim is trying to use his brains to come up with an idea on why that happened, before getting interrupted by Iris, who tells him that it's his fate to fight all over the world. Maxim, being the curious person he is, trusts this totally random and strange lady he has never seen before and decides to embark on a journey to fight for his life. Once Maxim enters Sundeltan, a big earthquake emerges, and after buying a few more boomerangs, he learns that the cause of those earthquakes seem to come from the nearby cave, so he decides to check it out. After solving a few more puzzles and finding the key, spoilers, there are going to be a lot of keys in this game, He finds that the cause of those earthquakes comes from a creature by the name of Catfish, who's simply doing this because it's bored. So Maxim decides to take good care of him by, once again, throwing a few boomerangs at the catfish, and the catfish unfortunately doesn't drop his jewels before disappearing again. Now, word in town is that there is a woman looking for us, so we decide to check back in the cave, only to find Tia being trapped by monsters. Once again, we throw our favorite items at the enemy, and Tia decides to join the party. So, what do you do when you embark on a journey to find your destiny, and your childhood best friend decides to join you so you can be together at all times? That's right, you dispose of her. So, we quickly take care of Tia, probably not the way she wanted it though, before continuing our journey. This would also be the point where you would get your first capsule monster, but since Maxim is the only legend in this tale, we skip that and head right into Alunsi. In the castle, two experts called Birdie and Bart try to steal a crown by claiming it's an imitation. Even though their plan doesn't quite work out the way they were hoping for, they still manage to take the crown and flee with it into the castle's basement. Searching through the basement, we find an infinite amount of bombs in a chest that we can now use for ourselves. Seriously, what could possibly go wrong with that, I wonder? We make use of some of the game's good mechanics, solve some more puzzles, and advance in the dungeon until we find the two thieves that took the crown. They decide to trap Maxim and flood him out of the castle, but once again, things don't go like they planned, and in the end, Maxim is the only one remaining. We save the crown, return it to the king, and get some good money for being a generous and honest citizen before making our way to the next cave. There we find a boy who played with the key to Tambal before a monster appeared and he threw the key at it. So we continue pleasuring the game's excitement for keys as once again we solve puzzles, pick up items, and approach the boss. Now, Regal Goblin was the first boss that gave me major troubles, and I was pretty much expecting just what happened. The fact that his attacks hurt quite a lot, and that he summons companions that hurt even more with their magic, made this fight a huge mess. Technically, you can put Regal Goblin to sleep by casting Drowsy, but without manipulation, that actually isn't really a reliable strat for this fight, since the actual hit rate is rather low. Another problem was the lack of healing means in this fight. Having access to only normal potions and the strong spell means I had to sacrifice quite a few miracles to make it through. After dying and over again, eventually I got a pattern that worked out and got me through this. Now, I do have to mention that this would have been much easier if I would have gotten the Catfish Jewel drop from the last boss fight, since that does roughly 70 damage to all enemies and barely costs any IP. But since we're doing this without RNG manipulation, and I wasn't very lucky in the Catfish boss fight, we had to struggle for Regal Goblin with just boomerangs. Eventually, it worked out though, and Maxim was able to continue on his journey by himself. Fun fact, you don't need to actually pick up the key from the chest after the fight. The trigger to advance further is the boss fight itself, and not the actual key item. We pick it up regardless, and head back to the small shrine, where we are finally able to advance further to Tambal. In Tambal, we meet Guy and his sister Hilda, and go on a little shopping spree. It is the first town to sell high potions, as well as big boomers, so after stocking up on items, as well as getting a cookery for the upcoming dungeon, we are doing a test of strength with our new friend Guy before getting interrupted by Kamu and his goons in the process. We get a new party member in this fight, and what is the first thing we do? Correct, dispose of Guy, just like we did with Tia before taking care of Kamu's companions. Since we now have 3 party members, Maxim can switch around between front and back row. Being in the back row means Maxim only takes half damage, but in the process also only deals half damage with melee attacks. So fights become a bit more strategic, but also a little bit safer from this point on forward. After the fight, we find out that Kamu kidnapped Guy's sister Hilda, so not only do we have to rescue her now, we also have to drag 2 half-dead bodies with Tia and Guy along the way. So we go to visit Tambal Tower and once again solve puzzles, collect items, and get the key to the top floor. I'm starting to see a pattern developing here, before reaching the top floor and engaging into a fight with Kamu. Now, the Kamu fight actually went a lot smoother than I thought it would. Buster attack wasn't doing as much damage as I thought it would, and the companions are taken care of with 2 big boomers that also damage Camus in the process. When it got too dangerous, I put Maxim in the back row and healed with the newly acquired high potions. I did get a little bit unlucky on my first attempt, since Sleep Stinger put me to sleep and Camus just straight up murdered me. My second attempt got much luckier, where only 1 out of the 3 Sleep Stingers put Maxim to sleep, only for him to wake up immediately afterwards. The Kukuri's IP attack did real good damage, which certainly made things easier as well. Generally, this boss could have been a much bigger issue, but I got lucky, so I was able to get through it rather quickly. Unfortunately though, just like Catfish, Camus didn't want to drop his jewels, so with the help of Iris, we got back into the village, where we took Hilda home since she got injured during the escape. Guy decides to join the party permanently, which, to be fair, didn't make much of a difference since he's already been half dead for the past hour anyways, and the journey continued. I did go up to Temple Tower one more time to get the chests that are on the top floor. The Fire Dagger is the only item that Maxim is able to equip, but it's going to be very important for the upcoming boss fight and a couple of other ones later. I also picked up the other items as well, in case I needed to sell some of them for money. Even with 4 times the money you get in retry mode, money management is pretty tight in early game, so having some excess equipment to sell off is always a good idea. Arriving in Clemento, we find out the rich millionaire that owns like half of the city is looking for the ruby apple that supposedly lies in the depths of the cave just north of town. Since Maxim is tight on money, like I just mentioned before, he decides he's gonna bring him his apples before continuing on his journey. So, leaving town and entering the ruby cave, you probably already guessed it, solved puzzles, picked up items, and found yet another key. You could also get your second capsule monster here, but since this is Maxim's story and his story only, sorry Titus, we're not going to do that. Now, for everybody that has played this game before, you probably know what boss awaits you at the end of it. Before starting this playthrough, I went through most of the bosses in my head to plan ahead certain strategies and stuff, and when it came to the Ruby Cave and Tarantula, I was already afraid that this fight would be a huge mess. And to be frank, huge mess is probably an understatement. This fight was even way worse than what I ever imagined. Tarantula in general hits pretty hard, but the most annoying thing by far is the regular single target attack that has a high chance to paralyze the party member that got targeted. Now, while this is annoying in a casual playthrough, it's usually not that big of a deal, since you can heal the status with items or spells. Well, here it is a far bigger issue since there is nobody to heal the status, which means you're very likely to die. And I did. Over and over and over and over and over and over again. What made things even worse was that Maxim was actually slower than the boss after it used Spiderweb. So after roughly 15 minutes of failed attempts, I decided I need to change up my strategy or else I'm gonna be stuck here for days. I went back into the Catfish Cave to get the speedy ring that I didn't pick up earlier, since I wasn't feeling like doing the enemy gauntlet that is lined up in front of the chest. With the speedy ring, I made sure my agility is high enough to outspeed Tarantula even after the use of Spiderweb. Additionally, I also got myself the Bravery spell in Clemento. Having more defense basically means being able to tank more hits and potentially kick out of paralyzation before Maxim goes down. So, with those new means and strategies in battle, I went back at Tarantula again and the result was, well, basically the same as before. I died over and over again, but I did manage to survive quite a bit longer than I did before, basically showing me that I am on a good path to victory. After grinding this boss for a total about 2 hours, I finally got to the point where RNG was in my favor just enough to burn down that spider into oblivion. The Sinistral can brag all they want about how powerful they are. In my opinion, this little piece of insect is the real gatekeeper in this kind of run. Anyways, once the boss was down, we find Jafar, who got trapped by Tarantula. He tells us that the ruby apple actually never existed, but it's just something he made out of red glass a long time ago, and as a gift for rescuing him, he actually gives us one. we decide that it's still good enough to give the millionaire regardless, and head over to Jafar's place afterwards to give him the money he rightfully deserved. With that being said, and that annoying spider out of the way, we are on to continue on our journey. Marching into Parcelite, we meet waifu Ceylon, where she defends a little girl from even smaller bullies. What an introduction to a new character. Very impressive game. We head to the castle where we get to watch our exhibition match, we talk to the king, and she joins the party against her will after the king commanded her to help us find the treasure sword. She doesn't trust Maxim and probably already knew what would happen next. And she was right. Once Ceylon joined the party, the first thing is, you probably already guessed it, we're killing her off as well. Once Maxim is on his path alone again, we enter the treasure sword shrine only to, and I know I'm repeating myself, solve puzzles, get items, and, of course, another key. I do want to point out a few specific items that we're getting here along the way, like the undead ring and the cold rapier, which will serve us very well for quite a few battles even later into the game. What's even more important though is probably the mind ring. The mind ring is the first item with access to the stronger spell, which is the tier 2 healing spell in this game. Having stronger at this part of the game is a huge help, because we're getting to the point where strong doesn't help at all, and even high potions aren't as useful anymore as they used to be. Considering we don't actually get access to stronger as a spell until the next 5 dungeons, this ring is extremely valuable when it comes to healing. Other than that, there isn't a lot worth mentioning here, that is until we get to the boss of this dungeon. We already briefly talked about this at the very beginning of the video. This boss fight is actually split into 2 different phases. First of all, you have to beat both clowns with a full party, which is not a big issue thanks to the cold rapier and the fire dagger. But once you beat both bosses, the party decides to split and fight them at the same time. Now, that is not a problem for the first fight with Pierre, since you got Maxim, but in the second fight with Danielle, the game removes Maxim and forces you to do the fight with Guy and Salon. Now here's where the problem starts. Since both of them are dead, you immediately game over once the fight starts. So, if you want to be 100% accurate, the answer to can you beat Lufia to only Maxim technically is no. You could always hack the ROM of the game to replace Guy and Salon with Maxim for this fight, but since I am doing this on a real SNES console, that's not a possibility either. So I decided that for the sake of the challenge, since the game doesn't give me any other options, I'm going to revive Guy and Salon for this single fight to continue. The first part of the boss fight wasn't that big of an issue, since I had buffed up Maxim doing good amounts of damage with the cold rapier while healing to full with the newly acquired mind ring. So after I took care of Pierre, we got to the second part of the boss fight with Guy and Salon. Both of them only have the equipment they wore when they initially joined the party, and since both of them never got any experience, this fight was actually not that easy. Guy was mostly meat shielding, and Salon had to juggle both the healing and doing the damage with her spark spell. Eventually I got to a point where I was looking for Guy to help out healing along the way with his tough hide IP attack, so Salon could use spark more often. The fact that occasionally the boss didn't attack and I got a free turn definitely helped out as well. It took some time, but eventually Danielle went down as well, and after the boss battle was done for good, both Guy and Salon went back to sleep again. I do want to mention that when I tried to kill off Guy and Salon, I got 2 back-to-back red core encounters, which are usually really rare, basically telling me the game is taunting me. Even more so since all of them escaped before I could kill any of them, so no bonus experience for Maxim either. After taking care of the party members, Maxim brings back the treasure sword to the king of Parcelite before being told that a single man has destroyed the entire city of Gordawan, which lies in the west of Parcelite. Salon decides to join the party permanently, just like Guy did before her, and we're off to Gordawan on our journey to destiny. Gordawan Tower isn't really worth mentioning for the most part. We get the hook shot, find a key, along with a puzzle that actually blocked me from advancing in this game for weeks when I was a child. Seriously, that room. And ascend to the top of the tower to find Jade is there waiting for us. I did think about trying to defeat Jade with only Maxim here, but at that time I didn't really want to grind up the necessary level to do so. I did, however, make a separate save file so I could come here back later and still do it. Spoilers, I did and actually succeeded, but I'll probably upload that fight in a separate video sometime in the future, in case anybody's interested. So after Jade took care of Maxim, Iris returns and revives the party before telling both Guy and Selen that it's their destiny to fight as well. Nope, not you, Tia, you're not important enough. Maxim doesn't care for that though and kills off everybody afterwards again. Oh, did I mention that I ran into Red Course again while doing that? Seriously, this encounter is usually really rare, but for some reason I seem to get it every time I wanted to kill off party members. And, just like last time, obviously, the course ran off before I could do any damage to them. Anyways, after reporting back to the King of Parcelite, a messenger from Tambal comes in and reports that Hilda's condition has worsened. So Guy decides to go back to Tambal, leaving Maxim alone with two girls by his side. Luckily, Maxim doesn't have any weird kinks, so he just decides to continue his journey along, with two unconscious women by his side. And yes, nothing weird going on here. I promise. Anyways, we stop by in Merrick's to buy Gladius, which is gonna be very important against Gators later on, as well as the fake and trick spells to increase Maxim's stats for boss fights even further. The upcoming cave isn't anything special, as it doesn't even have a boss. In fact, it doesn't even have a key. That by itself is already a good way to tell that there is pretty much nothing going on here. After destroying the evil orb and getting rid of the monsters, the bridge is rebuilt and we're off into Bound Kingdom, where the party meets Dekar for the first time. An evil Idura appears and tries to take over the kingdom, but Dekar is not having any of this and quickly chases him away. Dekar tries to fight Maxim, but backs off once he realizes what kind of legend is standing in front of him. Maxim goes to meet the king, and the prince heads off into the North Labyrinth because he thinks he can take out Idura by himself. Dekar chases after him, and we decide to do the same and head there as well. In the cave, we pick up several items again, including the Thunder Ring that is going to be very important for a certain boss fight later, as well as some other stuff. Surprisingly, the game breaks with its traditions here and doesn't actually put a key anywhere, so we can advance without any problems. Once we actually make it to the end of the dungeon, we find the prince, who is trapped by Idura. Idura also traps the party and decides to summon a couple of monsters of us, and the next boss fight begins. The four mummies do big damage, but can be easily out-healed and slowly killed off using the fire dagger. The set of 3 trolls shouldn't be a big issue either, that is unless... yeah... that is something that I completely forgot. Trolls, similar to the tarantula we battled in Ruby Cave earlier, actually have a chance to paralyze you on attack. You know what that means? Another round of get lucky or die. In addition, this time around, we have 3 enemies that can potentially paralyze Maxim and that by default are even faster than him. The only good thing is they don't deal a lot of damage when it's in the back row. So Maxim had to use the Kaichiel's Fleet IP attack to get his agility up to a point where he can outspeed them and then slowly kill them off and heal every once in a while at the same time. While every attack from the trolls can potentially paralyze Maxim to the point where they just kill him off slowly and there is nothing I can do about it. Yeah. It was as much fun as it sounds. And to make things even worse, I had to go through the mummies fight again every time I died before being even able to try the trolls again. While it wasn't as bad as the tarantula fight was, this still took me a good amount of time until I was finally able to win the battle. So, the award for most underrated boss battle that turned out to be a huge garbage RNG fest definitely goes to this one. After we're done, Dekar comes to rescue the prince and Idura quickly vanishes into thin air. We return to the castle and find out that Jade went to visit the king to tell him that it'll destroy the world, starting with Parcelite. What an evil plan that is indeed. Tia and Selen head back to Parcelite to warn everybody, while Dekar and the returning guy join our party to make it a nice and manly threesome going on forward. Since this is Maxim's tale though, first thing we do is take out both of them to make sure only our savior remains. We head up all the way in the ancient tower, completing puzzles and picking up a key in the process. Yes, there is actually a key in here again after we didn't have one in the past 2 dungeons. We play a little racing dungeon with monsters where Maxim obviously gets trolled the first time around, luckily this isn't a speedrun, before reaching the top floor where Jade is already awaiting Maxim's arrival. Now, the Jade fight is not that big of an issue if we approach it correctly. All of his attacks are physical based, so the Fury Helmet's Menace IP attack, which lowers his strength by 1/8, combined with the Bravery spell to raise your own defense, make sure the incoming damage is manageable, even more so with switching between rows. The Trick spell we got in Mermaids makes sure that Maxim puts out good amounts of damage with the Gladius and its wholly based IP attack. It's very unlikely that you get Maxim's agility high enough to actually outspeed Jade, but that's not a big issue if you plan ahead properly. In my first attempt I did get a little bit unlucky getting back-to-back devastations, with the first one hitting real hard due to Maxim being in the front row, actually wiping me in the process. Because of that, I stayed in the back row for the second attempt for most of the time, and it really wasn't a big problem at all, and Jade went down eventually. After the fight is over, Jade activates a mechanism that will destroy the island Parcelite is on, and the remaining party members can only escape without him since Maxim is too far off and can't be reached. Like, that would actually make any difference, like, we all know who the hero here is anyways. So, Maxim goes ahead, breaks the statues and the seals, and gets wiped by the Tao's mechanics in the process, only for Iris to appear last minute and make the save by teleporting him back to Parcelite. Ceylon cries because Maxim is alive, Tia realizes she's been friend-zoned into eternity and leaves, Maxim and Ceylon get married, Ceylon gives birth to a little baby boy, and they lived happily ever after. After about a year has passed since Maxim took care of Jade, Idura suddenly returns and kidnaps little Cheros. How could they ever forget about Idura? I mean, he held them up in North Labyrinth with his freaking trolls for ages, for crying out loud. He escapes to the Northern Lighthouse, and Maxim and Salon are on the way to rescue the baby boy. Actually, only Maxim, because he needs to take care of his wife first in a way that probably wasn't very much to her liking. Anyways, Maxim is on his way to the lighthouse where we find a puzzle, literally this time, that I haven't done in years and couldn't remember at all, before getting yet another key. On the way up, we also pick up the B-Rock, which not only gives Maxim a real good agility boost, but also comes with a handy AoE Paralyze IP attack, something that will get some very good use later in the game. At the top we meet Idura, who threatens the parents to hurt their baby if they step any closer, before Iris once again comes in to make the save for little Cheros, so Maxim can go for the attack. Now, the Idura fight, while not being that super dangerous, is a little bit annoying. His physical attacks after using Bravery don't really deal a lot of damage. The more dangerous attack is definitely Idura Thunder, which hurts quite a bit. The most annoying thing though is him summoning companions, because those actually hurt quite a bit. Luckily, they can be one-shot with the bolt attack from the Thundering that we got earlier. Putting on the Thundering does mean that there is no more access to the stronger spell though, since that one is in the Mind Ring, so we have to resort back to high potions from earlier. Since Idura Thunder is the only attack that actually does lots of damage, the high potions are still enough to out-heal it, and eventually Idura goes down. Not for the last time though. After the fight, Iris tells Maxim that he should have died in the ancient tower and that he should lay his weapons to rest, because the challenge ahead is too much for him. Maxim ignores her, and Ceylon decides to join him because for some reason she likes being beaten into unconsciousness, I guess? The two of them make their way to a lane, where Guy and Dekar are already waiting to rejoin the party. Being the good hero that Maxim is, he immediately takes care of everybody again to make sure nobody is in his way to fulfill his destiny. Once we reach Elaine, the first thing we do is going to the magic shop. Elaine is the first city to sell the stronger spell, so finally there is no more need to rely on the Mind Ring for proper healing. We also get the other spells along the way, but due to Maxim's low intelligence, he may be a legendary hero but he's not very smart, they won't see much usage. The party is looking for a ship to cross the sea, and we find out that the only person in town with a ship went to the Phantom Tree Mountain in search for the legendary, you guessed it, Phantom Tree. We approach the mountain, find another key, as well as the fire arrow before reaching the top. Then we find Jade, who cannot advance any further because the path is blocked by a monster, which means it's time for another boss fight. The lions aren't really a big issue, they only do physical attacks, so putting Maxim in the back row and buffing his defense is usually enough to reduce the incoming damage to a decent amount. Technically they are not immune to instant death, so you could one-shot them with the Undead Ring's Perish IP attack, but the chances of that hitting are really low, so we go into this with another strategy. Luckily, they are not immune to Paralyze either, so the B-Rock we picked up early in the Northern Lifehouse comes in really handy here. Once the lions are paralyzed, Maxim can start buffing his stats and then go to work until both are down. After we took care of the lions, we reach the Phantom Tree and teleport back to Elaine with Jade. As a thanks of helping him, he offers us to sell to Gruberik and Narcissus with the party. Now, before we continue on with the story, we take a little detour to Gruberik. Not for the ancient cave though, because as stated in the rules, that one's not allowed. But we actually go to visit the item shop. Gruberik's item shop sells sleep balls, and those are gonna be very important for the next couple of boss fights. You'll see why once we get there. Once we get to Narcissus, a weird melody starts to play, causing all single ladies in town to go to the Tower of Sacrifice north of town, so of course we go after them. At the tower we do the usual stuff, like solving puzzles, pick up the key, as well as some items along the way. At the top of the tower, we meet the girls and the party gets trapped by Idura. Dekar and Idura get a discussion going whether or not Dekar is actually dumb before we break the barrier and engage in battle. Remember the sleep balls we got in Gruberik? This is the first of 3 fights where we make use of them. Idura being weak to the sleep status makes this fight pretty much free. Put him to sleep, buff, and go at him until he's done. The girls are rescued, and we continue our journey with Kowloon being the next town. There isn't really much to see there though, so we're heading straight to the Kowloon North Shrine. This is a pretty small dungeon. In fact, it's so small it doesn't even have a key, so that should already tell you a lot about how important this one is. The only noteworthy thing is we pick up the Lion Fang as well as the Dekar Blade. Though the Dekar Blade is not gonna get any use since Dekar is dead anyways and soon to be gone from the party. It does sell for a decent amount of money though, so I guess it's still worth picking up here if you ever run out of money. We continue further in the shrine, only to find out that we have to fight Idura yet again. Luckily, he didn't learn from his past mistakes and is still susceptible to sleep, so Idura 3 is just as free as Idura 2 was. After Idura is dead for good, we find Iris, who was trapped by him, in the back of the dungeon. Teleporting out doesn't seem to be working, since there is some sort of device blocking the use of magic, so we continue on finding it. I always wondered why they didn't just walk out of there considering the shrine is so small anyways, but I guess storyline reasons. Once the device is found, Dekar is quickly destroying it before being ambushed by the last efforts of Idura. The party has to teleport out without him, and we got one less party member to drag around. Next stop is the town of Treadle, where we find out that there is somebody selling a ship at a good price. How convenient. Well, Lexus, the guy we're looking for, isn't in town right now, but in his laboratory up north, so we'll pay him a visit there. Once we reach the laboratory, inventor Lexus shows us his newest invention, the engine. And the party is blown away. We go check out his machine that measures energy until Maxim the Legend breaks it. Lexus wants to join the party and even offers to build his engine into a ship, but he needs a better ship for that. So we teleport back to Elaine to talk to Jade and ask him to make a ship out of the Phantom Tree. Since that is taking some time though, we go back to Treadle and wait until our new ship is done. We run into a girl selling flowers and she collapses. Selen puts her to sleep and the party offers to find the flower she's been looking for, which should be located at the Flower Mountain. I never really noticed the creativity when it comes to dungeon names in this game until now. Anyways, we pick up the hammer, which now makes our select item collection complete. We pick up yet another key, a good indicator whether a dungeon should be taken serious or not, as well as a few items on the way, the burn sword being one of them. This is going to be used against the next boss since it has much more attack than the fire dagger, and the upcoming boss is weak to fire attacks. Once we made it to the top, we're about to fight the next boss, which is the Rogue Flower. Remember how we cheesed the past 2 bosses with sleep balls? Well, this is number 3, since Rogue Flower, just like Idura, is susceptible to sleep. So we throw sleep balls and then watch the flower burn right in front of us to collect the real flower the girl has been looking for. We return to town to hand it over to the girl, and just so happened to be perfectly timed for Jade to test out our new ship. Lexus joins the party, and now we're proud owners of a ship. So, how do you think Lexus for his generosity the best way? You probably already guessed it. We'll dispose of him just like we did with everybody else. Once we reach Dekar Kingdom, the first way is to go to Magic Merchant. This one sells 3 really good spells, that being Courage, which is a straight upgrade to Bravery, Shield to raise our magic defense, as well as Mirror that reflects magic back at the caster. We witness the ruby icon getting stolen and obviously want to help out. There was somebody who already made fake jewels out of red glass, right? Right. The party teleports back to Clemento to talk to Jafar, who just so happened to study under the tutelage of the man who originally built the ruby icon. He makes a new one for the party, we bring it back, but unfortunately they notice it's the wrong one. The truth comes to light, and we're on to the way to the Dunkirk North Cave to check out what's going on. Now, this cave is probably my least favorite dungeon in the entire game. The enemies are annoying, the layout is annoying, I always forget stuff, and pretty much everything else. Shadows here are somewhat dangerous as well if you don't come prepared, because their vile laughter attack has a decent chance to insta-killing you. Luckily, the undead ring not only does 3 times the damage against undead enemies, it also protects you from insta-death, so you don't have to worry about that one too once you equip it. At the end of the cave, we find James, who stole the ruby icon, trying to sell it off. Soldiers attack us, and the next boss fight takes place. This boss fight is once again a rather tricky one. Even in the back row, the soldiers still do decent amounts of damage, especially with their dash attack. Luckily, they're not immune to paralyze, so we can once again make use out of the B-Rock's IP attack to make sure we're not getting attacked 4 times each turn. Once you're safe, you can just attack them from the back row until the fight is over. After the fight is over, Prince Claus flees back into Grazia Kingdom, or 3Y Kingdom as we'll find out later, and James is being taken care of. The ceremony is going on as planned, and everything is good. That is, until I noticed that everybody actually got revived during the ceremony. So the first thing we do afterwards is making sure that Maxim is the only one left standing. After traveling through the Watergate in Aurelio, we get to Faerun Kingdom. Once again, the first way here is going shopping. We buy a few X potions, as well as visit the Magic Merchant, since Faerun is the first place where you can buy Champion, which is the tier 3 healing spell. We're also getting Ice Walk, which will be another spell that's not going to find any use, but might as well have a complete collection. We get to talk to Hans, who tells us that someone landed on Northeast Tower, which supposedly could be Amon, so of course we're going to check that out. Did I mention that I was not a big fan of the Dunkirk North Cave? Well, the Northeast Tower here is pretty close behind it. The only good thing here is that it doesn't have a boss fight, but it still has a key, so that's something, I guess. Anyways, we make our way to the top to find Hans, who is paralyzed and cannot move at all. Amon appears, Guy charges at him before being demolished into oblivion. Thanks Amon, but we already took care of that earlier. Guy gets back up to his feet, Hans takes the green stone, and we're back into the castle where we watch the scenes between the prince, the princess, and Hans unfold. That is until we boldly get interrupted by a soldier that tells us that the town of Auguria was completely demolished by what appears to be Amon. We make our way to Auguria to find a town full of corpses. Thanks game, I've been dragging a few of those around my party as well, but also Iris, who tells Maxim that he cannot defeat Amon. That is, unless we get access to Dual Blade. So we help Iris bury all of them, ask her if she'll ever show her true face, and continue on our journey. We're making a quick stop in Treble to buy Tarot Balls. Those actually only have one single purpose, and that is for the upcoming boss fight, but more on that later. Once reaching Portravia, Lexus reunites with his old friend that wants to build a submarine from the ship that we have. Unfortunately, an elf child decides to steal the plans and runs off to the Mountain of No Return, so of course the party chases after her. The dungeon itself is really short and only has 2 puzzles. The real issue here is the boss. The gargoyles deal huge amounts of damage, even to the back row when using their special attacks. What makes things even worse is that they're also relatively fast, making it hard for Maxim to outspeed them without additional agility from spells or other sources. In fact, They did so much damage that I went back and visited the next town Barnen to stock up on defense by getting new equipment before going back at it again. After returning and playing around with a bit of a few setups, I figured out the best way to do this. Luckily, with some good agility you can outspeed them, and the Courage spell in combination with the new equipment raises your defense to a point where you can tank 7 to 8 attacks if they don't use their special attack. So I basically waited until they did 4 normal attacks and then threw a Terror Ball. Terror Balls have a roughly 50% chance to insta-killing one of the gargoyles. I hope it hit, and I actually got lucky. The first 2 hit, and then the fight became a lot more manageable. After the fight, we meet Ardy, who tells the girl to give back the plants before another elf arrives and tells us that Amon took Karen to a shrine nearby to enhance his own energy. Since Lexus left the party, there is a spot open that Ardy is going to fill now. Unfortunately for him, the same fate everybody else experienced also awaits him, and we kill him off as soon as we run into the first encounter. Once that is done, we make our way to the Divine Shrine. We do the same thing as in every other dungeon, which is solving puzzles, collecting keys, and picking up items on the way. Shoutouts to this room in particular that made me pull my hair out when I played this game for the first time as a little kid. I do want to specifically mention the rocket ring here, which is probably one of the most important items in this entire run. It gives Maxim plus 40 agility and helps a lot when it comes to outspeeding enemies, so that one is definitely a must get. Once we get to the end of the dungeon, we can see Amon, who is trying to force Karen to open the door to the Divine Room before being interrupted by the party. Amon wants to smash them, but Karen channels all her inner power to overcome him. Unfortunately, due to the excessive use of her energy, she dies shortly afterwards, and Ardy decides to join the party permanently to avenge Karen in the process. We go to the Divine Room and get some good stat upgrades before heading back to Portravia, where Lexus tells us that he is finished remodeling our ship, which now also functions as a submarine. With our new toy in hand, we can now enter the Shrine of Vengeance from below, since the main entry has been destroyed. At this point, I don't think I need to mention most of the stuff happening in dungeons, as it's mostly the same old thing. Solve puzzles, grab keys, and approach the boss. The boss here though is one that gave me quite a few problems. There were several things to watch out for here. First of all, he is faster than Maxim by default even with the rocket ring, so I had to use the phaser shield and its fleet IP attack in order to outspeed him. I also had to wear the jet helmet to be immune to confuse, since he likes to do that as well. The biggest problem though was his thunder attack, which is so strong that it basically one-shots Maxim with full HP even after buffing his magic resistance with shield. So I needed a pattern where he doesn't do thunder, while letting me jungle between buffing my agility, healing myself, and damaging the boss with the Tough Heights IP attack. Sounds confusing? Yeah, it was. Luckily, I got a good pattern eventually and was able to beat it. Once we were done, we grabbed the curse bow and returned back to town. In Barnen, we meet Iris, who is suddenly questioning the love between Maxim and Celan, and to be honest, I can kinda understand why, considering we've been dragging the unconscious body of Maxim's wife along the way the entire time, but that's another story. She tells us to meet her at the Tower of Truth and leaves. So we head to the Rail and the Tower of Truth to find out what's actually going on. The Tower of Truth is another dungeon that definitely makes a list of things I don't like in Lufia too much. Again, we have several very annoying rooms filled with a lot of monsters. Other than that, just like in most other dungeons before, it's not anything special. Solve the puzzles, grab the key, and take some items along the way. Once we reach the top, we find Iris, who wants to join Maxim and Celan in the room with the Truth Mirror. Before they are able to see anything though, the party gets interrupted by our next boss fight, which is a set of 3 white dragons. This is a boss fight I actually thought would be pretty much free, before it turned out to be a huge nightmare. Technically, you only need to hit them with 1 Dragon Tooth to put them into HP range where they use stronger, then follow up with another Dragon Tooth to finish them off. The problem, even with maxed out agility equipment, Maxim is not able to outspeed them and kills off way before he has a chance to fire off the first Dragon Tooth. Not a big problem, you're most likely going to say now. Just tank the attacks from the back row. Well, unfortunately it's not that easy. Even in the back row their attacks still hit very hard. Additionally to that, each of the dragons can also cast Ice Walk, which does roughly 80% of Maxim's max HP with a single hit. To add another problem on top, a Dragon Tooth from the back row didn't do enough damage to actually put them into the needed HP range for stronger, so I went in with another strategy. I put Maxim in the back row turn 1 and tried stacking up as much agility on him as possible, and use Fleet from the Phaser Shield to get enough agility to outspeed the dragons on turn 2. Meanwhile, I also needed enough defense to actually tank 3 hits in the back row so I won't die before even casting Fleet. And to make things even worse, all of that didn't help if only one of the 3 dragons decided to cast Asvalk. Sounds annoying? You bet it was. Eventually I found a setup that somewhat fulfilled those requirements, and after a few attempts I actually got a pattern with no Icewalk, which let me finish the dragons off for good. After the fight, Iris seems to have vanished and the mirror is broken, so the party decides to leave before Iris returns and restores the mirror with her true face being shown in it. The party is still looking for Dual Blade and arrives in the next town where an old man supposedly has an idea of where it might be. Unfortunately, said old man has gone to Dragon Mountain, so we have to follow him to get further information on the whereabouts of the legendary sword. Now, Dragon Mountain has 2 of the hardest puzzles in the entire game in my opinion. The first one being the flower puzzle, which took me hours to complete as a kid, as well as the world's most difficult trick. If you know what you're doing though, you can complete both of them rather quickly. To give you an idea, I left the world's most difficult trick in this video, though I did speed it up so it's not gonna take that long, but enjoy. After completing the world's most difficult trick, we get the Lizard Blow, thinking it would be the only useful item here, but completely forgot about the Legend Helm. Afterwards, we picked up a few more chests on the way before meeting the old man we're looking for. Just as the conversations gets going, we get attacked by the dragon and the next boss fight starts. With the Lizard Blow and the Legend Helmet, this fight was free. The Legend Helmet IP reflects everything back at the enemy. Yes, everything. So you can easily buff yourself up and then go to work against the boss. The Lizard Blow makes sure that Maxim does a good amount of damage, even from the back row. While this fight goes on for quite a while due to the dragon's high HP, it's not really anything dangerous since you're protected most of the time due to the Brilliance IP attack from the helmet anyways. In fact, the IP attack is so broken that I decided not to use it in future boss fights anymore, due to it making the rest of the game basically free and destroying whatever challenge was left in this run. After we're done with the boss fight, we're going back to town and the old man gives us the Jade of Mermaids, saying there is another water town filled with mermaids where we might find further information on Dual Blade. Once we reach the town of Primal, we get to meet Marla, the queen of the town. We tell her we're looking for Dual Blade and she tells us that there is a legend that says it's in a submarine shrine. Briefly afterwards, a messenger is coming in, telling us that there has been a big current change around the submarine shrine and that Princess Piara is missing. The queen is leaving shortly afterwards. Where is she heading, one might ask? Anyways, we'll take the submarine to the shrine, only to find both the queen and the princess there. What a surprise! Before starting a big conversation, we get attacked by the next boss, which is the ghost ship. The ghost ship itself isn't that big of a deal, but it can confuse and insta-kill your party, both of which the shield helm protects against. Unfortunately though, I didn't put it on the first attempt and died rather quickly. Once I fixed that mistake, the battle was much easier and Maxim quickly took care of the ship by healing it to death. After the battle, the current changes again and the mermaids are sucked in, so our party quickly went in after them, only to find the submarine shrine cave. After the mermaids getting killed by a quick thunder, Salam puts the queen to sleep before being called into the shrine by Deos. This is where we see that quality assurance during development was obviously a big deal back then by Natsume, as the shrine's tileset is totally not completely screwed up at all. Fun fact, the US version is actually the only one to have this graphical glitch. It didn't appear in the original GP release and got patched for being released in Europe later on. Anyways, after the dual blade vanishes, the party gets teleported back to Jade, where Doom Island appears in the sky and basically annihilates the entire city. Unfortunately for the party, they have no way to reach the island up in the sky, so they return to Portravia, where Alexis tells them he could technically make an airship out of the current one, but he needs a more powerful engine for that. Such an engine can only be found in Grazie Kingdom, who is in the process of building an army trying to take over the world. How convenient. So we get to Grazie Kingdom, or 3Y Kingdom as the game likes to call it, where we get greeted by an army that puts the party to sleep and throws them into jail. In jail we have a reunion with Bart and Birdie, whom we haven't seen since the very beginning of the game. They help us crack open the jail door, but unfortunately don't get very far in their escape as they are being held up by soldiers that guard the jail's exit. Maxim quickly takes care of the soldiers before making his way back up to the surface, including a missing wall collision that lets you get out of bounds and access the key without doing the proper puzzle attached to it. We get up to the castle again before being greeted by more soldiers, which Maxim quickly takes care of before the actual boss fight of this dungeon is starting. The tank is harder than I first thought it would be. It does lots of damage, even to the back row, especially with the piercer attack. Luckily, it's not very fast, making it relatively easy to outspeed it. Once you buffed up Maxim's defense, you're pretty much safe as long as you stay in the back row and heal up after every hit. Piercer does not kill you with full HP, so I made sure to always heal up. That does make the fight much longer though, since the only time you can actually attack is when it does Missile Blast, basically giving you a free turn. What made things even worse was him silencing Maxim, so I couldn't use magic anymore and had to resort back to high-end X potions I still had from the earlier game. Unlike other status effects, silence doesn't wear off automatically, so I had to work with potions for the remainder of the fight. It did eventually work out, but it did take quite a while until the tank was finally down for good. After we're done with the tank, we get the necessary engine to upgrade our ship. The kingdom explodes for whatever reason, I'm not sure myself, and we're out of there and head back to Portravia. We get to visit Lexis, who remodels our ship, so we can now access the sky. With the newly acquired airship, we travel to Narvik, the last city in the game. The Elder tells us that the 3 girl he keeps trapped in his bedroom. What the hell is going on in that island? They're going to help us acquire the holy equipment on the towers and break Doom Island's seal in the process. Before we do that though, we go on a last shopping spree and stack up on X potions as well as get the Circle Shield, which greatly increases our ATB and damage in the process. Onto tower number 1, there was a little unexpected issue that I actually ran into. The towers have a few forced fights that you need to do in order to advance. Well, one of those was guarded by leeches. No big deal I thought, since they're weak to holy, so I just equipped the silver sword, thinking it's not gonna be a big problem. Unfortunately though, their single target attack puts party members to sleep, and since I don't have anybody to heal, well, I died. Eventually I got through the fight though and made it all the way to the top before being attacked by Jade yet again. Now Jade at this point is pretty much a pushover. Just put Maxim in the back, buff up your defense, and you're pretty much good to go. I didn't even use the Silver Sword's IP attack at the end since I wanted to save it for the upcoming fight with Ammon, which I was sure wasn't going to be as easy as this one. Jade went down after a while, we leave the girl there by herself, get the first divine item, or Pearl as the game likes to call it in the equipment menu, and are done with Tower 1 out of 3. Upon getting back in Narvik, we revisit the old man, he unlocks a second girl from his bedroom. This is actually real creepy if you think about it for a bit. And equip the pearl armor before continuing on. Now, equipping the pearl pieces is pretty important as they protect you against pretty much all status elements, which so far have been my biggest enemy throughout the run if you remember things like Tarantula, the Trolls, or just now the Legion. Afterwards, we go to tower number 2 to repeat the same process again. This time I was aware of potential status elements on the fights and got through with it with no problems. Once at the top, we get interrupted by Amon and battle number 2 starts. Luckily, due to the pearl armor, Maxim is now immune to status, which is something that Chaos Wave inflicts. Amon is very fast and actually killed me off on the first attempt, so I tried to get my agility up to the point where I can outspeed him after using the fake IP from the rocket ring. His physical attacks weren't a big issue once Maxim buffed himself up with courage. The much bigger problems were his magic attacks like Thunder and Ice Valk that still hit really hard even after putting up shield to increase the magic defense. Luckily though, I still had Mirror, which reflects back all of his magic attacks for 4 turns. That made healing up much easier as I only had to watch out for his physical attacks at this point. I healed up fully once with the armor's IP attack and only realized afterwards that it is actually a full AoE heal and also revive. Luckily, Amon quickly took care of the other party members again before eventually going down for good. Maxim gets the pearl helmet as a reward and girl number 2 stays alone at the top of the tower. The pearl helmet is just as broken as the legend helmet, with its IP attack reflecting everything back at the enemy for double strength for 4 turns. Since this was just as broken, again, I decided not to use it for the sake of the challenge. We get back to Narvik to pick up girl number 3 and empty the old man's bedroom for good. We go to tower number 3 and once again try to make our way to the top. I run into a leech and get killed again because it seems neither the pearl armor nor the pearl helmet actually save against sleep. Eventually I made it through the fight though and to the top of the tower. We get to save here and it is actually important to note that this is the last possible safe spot in the game. If I die anywhere from here on now, I'll get set back right to this very point, so I try to take things extra carefully from here on out. We get the last remaining divine item, which is the pearl shield, before Deus appears. Dual Blade appears alongside and Deus says, "Haha, I'll kill you." But Maxim's like, "Nope, not that easy," and is chosen by Dual Blade, scaring Deus away in the process. Doom Island gets trapped by the 3 girls on top of each tower, and Maxim would be on his way, if Amon wouldn't have destroyed their ship. So the party goes back to Port Ravia to get it fixed by Lexis. And we get to have a little cutscene with Maxim and the half-dead body of his bride that has been dragging all around all over the world. Artie and Guy decide to throw a celebration once this is done, even though they pretty much contributed nothing to save the world. Maxim equips the Pearl Shield as well as Dual Blade and we're off to Doom Island. Or we would be if there weren't monsters attacking all of a sudden. Luckily, Dekar is here to save the day, the only time he's actually useful in the story, and takes care of the monsters so we can crash into Doom Island for the final showdown. Luckily, there are a handful of miracle chests along the way to pick up as a safety measure, even though I probably won't need them. Remember, if we die, we go all the way back to tower number 3, so might as well play it safe. We approach Jade for the last fight with him, and just like the encounter at the tower, he really isn't a big threat at all. The only inconvenience is that the entire party got revived before this, so we need to take care of that before actually focusing on Jade. Another thing to mention here is that Maxim's IP bar gets fully filled before every battle, which means we can start each fight with Dual Blade's Wave Motion IP attack, which not only heals both of his HP and MP to full, but also raises his stats up a pretty good amount. In fact, it's so strong that Jade isn't even doing any damage to us anymore. Once Jade is done, we continue picking up miracles on the way before running into Amon. Thanks to the divine pieces and Dual Blade's Wave Motion, this one goes quite a bit faster than the encounter at the tower earlier. The strats remain the same though, reflect his magic back with Mirror, and go to work. I did stay in the back row for most of the battle, because even though Wave Motion increases your stats quite a bit, his normal attack still did good damage, and I didn't really want to risk anything here. Eventually, Aemon went down fairly easy, just like Jade did. By the way, did I ever mention that I streamed this entire challenge run live on Twitch? If you want to check out future runs or other streams live, make sure to head over to twitch.tv/RagnarAlvar and drop a follow. The channel is also linked in the description below the video. And if you haven't already, make sure to also subscribe to the YouTube channel and check the notification icon to make sure you're not missing out on future videos. Now, let's return to the last portion of the game. After being halfway done, I picked up a few more miracles on the way and successfully mastered the bravery test before being greeted by the third Sinistral, that being Arim. Now, due to a coding mistake in the game, Arim actually only uses 2 attacks the entire fight, one being Devastation Wave, which can be fatal since it inflicts instant death. Thanks to the Pearl equipment though, Maxim is immune to those. The other attack is Dark Fry, which cannot be reflected and also hurts a little, but is easily tankable due to Dual Blade's Wave Motion IP attack. Her other attacks could in fact be pretty annoying, since she can afflict several status elements, plus she also has Sap if I remember correctly. Like I mentioned though, due to an error in the game's code, she never actually uses any of those and decides to stick with Devastation Wave and Dark Fry, making this fight relatively easy. After a while, Arim goes down as well and there is only one more battle left to go. We approach the last floor only to find Deus and the final battle begins. This one actually combines the strategies of the battles before him. His Terror Wave attack can inflict all kinds of status elements, but thanks to the Pearl equipment, Maxim is immune against all of them. Unlike Arim, Deus actually also uses regular magic, so once again we're making use of Mirror. Deus himself puts up Dark Mirror occasionally, which reflects all attacks back at Maxim. And there was one time where I didn't pay attention and almost got myself killed because of that and the Dark Fry afterwards, leaving Maxim at a mere 34 HP. Luckily Maxim is way faster than Deus and I could easily out-heal it and continued on. Now those battles actually took quite a while due to their high HP, but since the attacks weren't really dangerous or anything, it was not a big problem, and eventually Deus went down, just like his 3 buddies, and the world is saved. All 4 Sinistrals reunite one last time to make sure Maxim and his half-dead buddies are not going to get out of Doom Island alive. The heroes channel all their inner energy, and because this game doesn't actually have a bad ending, they get rid of the Sinistrals for good. Unfortunately, this entire thing was too much for Solan, and she's all out of energy and about to die for good. Doom Island is starting to fall apart, and the party gets separated. Since Maxim and Solan are too far off for Ari to teleport them out of there, and Maxim never learned the escape spell, they have to go out alone, leaving the couple behind in the process. Deus appears one more time and tells Maxim that Doom Island is going to fall on Parcelite as his last action, before being finally done for good. Iris appears and wants to help Maxim one more time, even though she gets identified as Arim. The last path opens up, and the best music in the game starts to play. Maxim, with the help of Dual Blade, puts together all his remaining energy to destroy the 3 stones and change the course of Doom Island. Like the tragic hero he is, he also gives his life in the process to finally save the world for good this time around. So yeah, that is it for the game, and the answer to the question, can you beat Lufia 2 using only Maxim? If you don't count the Clown Battle and Treasure Sword Shrine, is yes, you can. And surprisingly, with the exception of a few status spamming bosses, it wasn't actually that hard if you know what you're doing. Now, before we're going to approach the end here, I did make a little list of most annoying things as well as most exciting things about the run. We will start with the most annoying things. Number 3 goes to the White Dragons. This wasn't as annoying as it was actually tricky. Once Maxim survived turn 1, the fight was free, but until I found a setup and had the amount of luck needed to get there, it actually took quite a bit. Coming in at number 2 are the Trolls. This one actually gets the award for most underrated fight in the game. I went into this thinking no problem, until I realized that those guys can paralyze Maxim just like Tarantula did. What even made it worse was there being 3 of them. The only reason they rank number 2 is because they only did single target attacks and were easily manageable otherwise. And for number 1, and you probably already guessed it, the tarantula fight. I really don't think I need to explain this any further. This fight was easily the gatekeeper of the entire challenge and the boss that took me by far the longest time. The Paralyze was just ridiculously hard to deal with in a setting like this, and you really have to come in prepared or else you stand no chance at all. Now that we got the annoying things out of the way, let's focus on the more exciting things about this run. Number 3. Replaying the game in a different way. Now, while that may sound weird, replaying the game I enjoy so much, but with a little twist really adds up to the excitement. I probably wouldn't have even picked it up again otherwise, simply because of how many times I completed it before. Number 2. Doing it live on stream. Now, this is not necessarily about the game itself, but the fact that I streamed all of it and had people suffer and enjoy with me really added to the experience. So, this one goes out to all of you. Thank you for watching live on Twitch, and thank you for watching on YouTube for making it this far. And last but not least, number 1 goes to the battle strategies. Now, while a lot of the boss fights weren't anything special, there were a few of them where you really had to go in with very specific strategies. Some of the bosses I needed to attempt several times, because my initial plan wasn't working out like I was hoping, and the constant change up made for an awesome experience of the game like I never had before. Generally speaking, I really enjoyed the challenge. It made me play the game in a completely different way than I ever did before, and if anybody feels like they want to attempt this as well, I can highly recommend you doing so. I also talked about having a separate save file because I wanted to attempt Gordovan and Jade once I was done with this run, and not only did I manage to beat him with only Maxim, I also beat the Act Dragon without glitching his HP out. So, if people are interested, I will probably upload those 2 fights in a separate video as well. With that being said, that is Lufia 2 being completed by only Maxim. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and also leave a follow on Twitch to watch future streams live. Feel free to comment below the video and suggest challenges you would like to see for future games. I'm always open to new ideas to breathe life into games I probably wouldn't replay otherwise anymore. That's it for me, thank you all for watching, and I hope I'll see you either here or on Twitch again sometimes in the future.